If you want an affordable mid-size sedan in America with all-wheel drive, you have very few options at the moment, and coming soon you'll have even fewer because Ford is supposedly exiting the market when the Fusion finally dies next year. In all likelihood, by the end of next year, there will be just two options available in America, this all-new Nissan Altima sitting right next to me, and the all-new Subaru Legacy. I haven't had a chance to drive the Legacy yet, but we have driven the wagon variant of it, the Subaru Outback, so if you want to check that video out, that is on our channel right now. In this video, we're going to dive right into the 2020 all-wheel drive Nissan Altima. 2020 doesn't bring any changes to the Altima except for a rearrangement of option packages because this was all new for 2019. For this generation, Nissan decided to make the Altima much more dramatically styled than before. They've also borrowed a lot of styling cues from their crossover lineup, like this big chrome bar that runs right there under that Nissan logo. We have full LED headlamps in all trims of the Altima except for the base model that still gets halogen headlamps. Inside the headlamp modules, there are some LED accents, but those function just as daytime running lamps and style accents. The turn signals are down here lower on the bumper, positioned right there with the optional fog lights in this trim. You'll find the fog lamps in SV trims and higher. Unlike the compact and mid-size crossover segments, there's not a lot of variation when it comes to the overall size of vehicles in the mid-size segment. So at just under 192 inches long, the Altima is within 1 or 2 inches of every key competitor. This is a segment where overall packaging efficiency is really important because some of the competition has notably more legroom than we find in the Altima, even though overall they're not that much bigger. As with the front end, Nissan decided to give the side a little bit of styling from their crossover lineup, so we get this floating roof design here. Some people really hate on this black piece of trim right here. Personally, it doesn't bother me at all, but let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. What bothers me more is that most mid-size sedans in America have a really sloping roof line right here. The days of having a roof that was pretty straight and then went down for the rear window, those are long gone because of overall efficiency. When you look closely at most mid-size sedans in America, you'll notice that the roof line starts dropping right around here, well before the rear passengers' heads, and continues dropping all the way back here to the trunk. This is a styling decision, but it also is focused on overall fuel economy because this shape is a little bit more aerodynamic than the classic shape of having a more upright rear window. With this Altima, they're trying a little bit of a different tactic because they're giving the Altima all-wheel drive for 2019 and 2020. So hopefully that will help stem the flow of shoppers that are choosing a Nissan Rogue over an Altima. But at the same time, Nissan is clearly focused on styling here. We definitely have that swoopy profile on the side, the more aggressive front-end look, and a more aggressive back-end look here as well. One interesting twist is that unlike most of the competition, we don't have LED elements back here in the tail lamps. These are standard incandescent bulbs, although we do have amber turn signals, which is definitely my preference. And then down here at the bottom, we have dual exhausts even with the base engine. When it comes to active safety, new car shoppers are demanding more and more from their new vehicles. And that's why Nissan is giving us autonomous emergency braking and collision warning standard on all models, including the inexpensive base model. For 2020, they're also allowing you to add some extra technologies to that base trim that weren't available in 2019. Optional on the base and standard on all the other trims is pedestrian detection, blind spot warning, rear cross traffic detection, park sensors, and rear autonomous braking. But you'll notice on this list that adaptive cruise control and the Nissan ProPilot system are not available until you get all the way up to the SV trim. So that is a little bit different than the Camry and the Accord, which include adaptive cruise control in much less expensive models. Speaking of engines, there are two of them under the hood for the Altima, but only one of them can be combined with all-wheel drive at the moment. The first one is a thoroughly revised 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine. It produces 188 horsepower and 180 pound-feet of torque when you get front-wheel drive, and then that drops down to 182 horsepower if you choose all-wheel drive. The other engine came as a little bit of a surprise to me. It's essentially the Infiniti VC turbo engine out of the Infiniti QX50 that's been adapted for the Nissan Altima. VC stands for variable compression. That is the only engine in the world that can mechanically vary the way the piston is moving in the cylinder to give you true variable compression. Other engines out there will try and imitate that same sort of process by leaving an intake valve open a little bit longer or a little bit shorter to effectively vary the compression, but that's the only engine that will really truly vary the way the piston is moving in the cylinder. That engine is available only with front-wheel drive at the moment. Another thing to know about that engine is it does prefer premium unleaded, although Nissan tells us that it will run safely and effectively on regular unleaded as well. Both engines are mated to continuously variable transmissions, and fuel economy ranges from 29 miles per gallon to 32 miles per gallon, depending on which one you get. The VC Turbo, oddly enough, gets the same fuel economy as this all-wheel drive model at 29 miles per gallon combined, but the best is, of course, going to happen with the base engine and front-wheel drive at 32. I'm going to give the front seats 8 out of 10 points in our front seat comfort score. I'm going to deduct 1 point because we don't have a four-way adjustable lumbar support over here on the driver's seat, and 1 point because we don't have the same range of motion on the passenger side. Most notably, the seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt. That said, for my body shape, I really like the way that Nissan's zero gravity seats feel. These are very, very comfortable for me. The tricky bit here is that they're just not as adjustable as some of the competition, so some folks out there may find these a little bit less comfortable. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion, and a nice touch here is that the driver and passenger doors open very, very wide. So if you're someone that likes to open your door wide to make it easier to get in and out of the vehicle, then this might be a good option for you. Although the Altima does not have quite as much combined legroom as the Honda Accord, we still have a very generously sized back seat. You can see I have about 6 or 7 inches of legroom left sitting right there with that front seat adjusted for me. And if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, I still have about 2 inches left with that front seat all the way back in its tracks. It also is a little bit more reclined than the driver's seat. Unfortunately, like most mid-size sedans in America, we find a little bit less headroom back here than we found in mid-size sedans decades ago. So trying to sit back here, my hair does brush the ceiling, and if I push my head back to that headrest, my head is definitely touching the ceiling. On paper, the Altima's headroom figures are a little bit below the direct competition, but honestly, sitting back here, I found just about as much headroom as we find in something like a Toyota Camry. As with the front seats, the rear seats are softly padded and definitely cushier than the average in this segment. So if you're looking for a more comfortable bench in the back of your family sedan, this might be a good option for you. We also have 2 air vents right here in the center console, a USB-C and a regular USB charging port, and then a fold-down center armrest that's softly padded and has 2 cup holders. Whether we're talking about crossovers or sedans, Nissan has long had a very strong dedication to cargo practicality, and the Altima is no different. We have 15.4 cubic feet of storage space right back here behind the trunk lid. That sounds a little bit smaller than some family sedans out there, but this is more practical than most of them because we can keep a 22-inch roller bag in this position and still close the trunk lid. And that's not something that we can do in most of the competition. So when we take a look at our roller bag score, we were only able to fit 4 24-inch roller bags back here. We were really close to being able to fit a 5th. We couldn't quite close the lid, however, but we could have fit 4 of those 24-inch roller bags and 2 or 3 22-inch roller bags. And that's the big difference between this trunk and some of the larger ones in this segment. They may have slightly more cubic feet, but they're not quite as deep, so you couldn't put a bag in this position. But as you can see, thanks to the depth of the trunk and the shape of the trunk lid itself, you can close it with a bag in that position. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in one of the top end trims, so we have a pretty standard sized moonroof right here for the driver and front passenger, height adjustable shoulder belts up front, and 2-way adjustable headrests. It's really obvious that with this generation of the Altima, Nissan wanted to up their interior game, so we find more soft touch and more premium materials in this cabin than we found in the last generation Altima. I think overall the design definitely feels modern and more attractive. We have a soft touch upper section on the front doors, a stitched insert right there, and a large softly padded armrest. We also have a pretty decently sized cubby down there at the bottom of the door. And as we move on over to the dashboard, you'll notice that continuation of those same soft touch materials. So this section of the dashboard is a soft touch material, as well as the upper section of the dashboard, and then we have hard plastics lower, for instance, around that glove compartment door. On the passenger side, we have a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a larger tablet computer inside, although some of the smaller ones might fit. A defining feature of this dashboard is this imitation wood trim that runs in a line across the dash from the driver all the way over to the front passenger side. It swoops down here under these air vents and under the infotainment system. Overall, I like this design, and I have to say that I've always liked the way that Nissan plays with colors. So in this top end trim, we get the charcoal upper section, and then we get this lighter tan lower section that really helps break up the acres of dark plastic that we find in so many mid-size sedans in America. If I'm nitpicking a little bit, I will say that even in this model, which is a full year after the launch of the vehicle, we still have some seams that are a little bit less than perfect. The seam right here, for instance, around the infotainment system, I'm surprised that Nissan didn't make this one piece. So instead we have a seam over here on the left and a seam over there on the right. Overall, the fit and finish in here is definitely better than the early production Altimas that I've been in, but I think it still could have been improved versus what we see in some of the competition. In the center of the dashboard, we have a standard touchscreen infotainment system. This features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in all versions of the Altima. That's a little bit different than we see in some of the competition, and it offers the availability of factory navigation as well. Overall, the software is pretty easy to use, although it doesn't feel quite as modern as some of the other manufacturers in this particular segment. It's very similar to what we see in other Nissan and certain Infiniti vehicles as well. Below the infotainment screen, we find 2 smallish air vents. I do wish that these 2 air vents were a little bit larger or pushed a little bit more air through them. Below the air vents, you can see that imitation wood trim a little bit more closely. There's also some bright work down there at the bottom of the wood trim to help dress things up a little bit. Let me know what you think about this overall design down there in the comment section below. I have to say that I like the overall design theme of the Altima's interior. The way that the fake wood trim interacts with things, the way the screen is positioned, etc. The overall look, I think, is quite attractive. But again, let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Below that, we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control system. This is also where we find the controls for the front heated seats and the heated steering wheel if your vehicle has that particular option. There are two USB inputs right there under that, a standard USB input, a USB-C input. We also have an auxiliary input and a 12-volt charging port. Behind the ports, we find a storage area where you can just about keep your larger smartphone with that USB cable connected. Engine start stop buttons right over here. We have a pretty traditional console shifter there, drive, then low behind that. Then there's a sport button right here at the back of the shifter. I'm not quite sure why there's no S or other logo there. Some folks probably don't even notice that button exists. And then behind the shifter, we have the electric parking brake and the auto brake hold button. You'll notice that one thing we don't have in a center console here is an engine start-stop button. That's because this vehicle does not have engine start-stop technology. So if you're looking for a vehicle that doesn't have that particular feature, if you find it annoying, this might be a good option. One thing I've always liked about modern Nissan vehicles is that they have very thickly padded armrests. Whether we're talking about the center compartment right here or the armrests on the doors, they're a lot more comfortable for your elbow than some of the competitions. Under that, we find a smallish center console storage area for a front-wheel drive vehicle. We have a storage tray right there that is movable to the front or completely removable from that area. And then we find a storage area that's probably about 4 inches deep or so. I wasn't able to fit any larger items in there, although you might be able to fit a half gallon of milk right there on its side. All trims of the Altima have this partial LCD instrument cluster, so we have a physical tachometer, physical speedometer, and then this 7-inch multifunction LCD right there in the middle. This is essentially the same display and the same software that we see in other Nissan vehicles out there. So we have the status of the vehicle's active safety systems, the ability to change certain vehicle settings right here within this display, a home screen with a digital tachometer. You'll also find fuel economy and pretty typical trip computer readouts. Nissan decided to use one of their newer flat-bottom steering wheel designs here in the Altima. I like the overall look. I think it's attractive. It also makes it a little bit easier for some folks to get in and out of the vehicle. So if you find yourself bopping your leg on the bottom of the steering wheel, this is going to give you a little bit of extra clearance. The steering wheel has a moderately thick rim and fairly aggressive sport grips for a mid-sized sedan in America. There are no paddle shifters on the back in this trim. You do have to get the turbocharged version if you want those. On the right side of the steering wheel, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, and this blue button turns on and off most of the active safety systems in the vehicle. Features like the autonomous braking system and the lane departure warning system will still remain engaged even with this button disengaged. We have a phone button right there, a voice command button, and then on the left side of the steering wheel, we have the buttons for the infotainment system. Next to the volume up-down button, we have a 4-way joystick and OK button. Those control that multifunction LCD between the speedometer and tachometer. One final button worth knowing about is this steering wheel button right over here to the left of the steering wheel. That engages and disengages the active steering system that's part of Nissan's active safety package. In our testing, this particular model, which again is the all-wheel drive trim, it's also the heaviest all-wheel drive trim, went 0 to 60 in 7.3 seconds. That is notably faster than something like the Nissan Rogue. Even though the Rogue and a lot of other crossovers out there have similar power to the Altima or a little bit more power, they're not going to be as quick because the Altima is lighter. If you want to go even faster, you have to give up the all-wheel drive, but you could get the Altima with the turbocharged engine, and that would go 0 to 60 in 6 seconds flat. We had the opportunity to snag one of those from a dealer locally and give that a 0 to 60 test. Our official number for that one is 6 seconds even. The light curb weight also pays dividends when it comes to braking and handling. This model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 118 feet. That is definitely shorter than most crossovers out there. As far as all-wheel drive sedans go at the moment, I think this handles and feels better out on the road than the 2019 Subaru Legacy, but does fall just a hair below the Ford Fusion. Now, the Ford Fusion is old, but it does have really good bones. Unfortunately, the Ford Fusion is going to be significantly more expensive than base versions of the all-wheel drive Altima. At the moment, we don't know what the 2020 Subaru Legacy holds for us, but based on my driving experience with the 2020 Outback, I'm hoping for good things with that Legacy. The Legacy is going to be closer to the ground than the Outback, so it's probably going to handle better. And we do have the option of getting the turbocharged 4-cylinder engine in that vehicle and all-wheel drive, and we don't have that option in the Altima. So Subaru Legacy XT, there is no direct corollary in the Nissan lineup at this moment. And I do think that's a pity because that XT engine is an awful lot of fun. It wasn't as fast as the turbocharged version of the Altima in our recent testing. However, it does get pretty close. I've stopped here because this surface is full of twigs, wet leaves, etc., and a lot of loose gravel and sand, and you can really see the traction that we get out of this all-wheel drive system. The steering wheel's also turned a little bit to make this a little bit tougher. As you can see, we get just a tiny hint of slip from one of the front tires and then one of the rear tires, and then the vehicle just takes off. I debated for a while about whether or not to bring the Altima onto this trail, but then I ultimately decided to do it because one of the reasons that you might want to get the all-wheel drive Altima is as an alternative to the average compact crossover in America. This definitely is going to feel a little bit more upscale in the interior than many of the compact crossovers. It's going to handle better. It's also going to be a little bit faster 0 to 60. But as you can see out on a trail like this, the Altima definitely has the traction that it needs in order to tackle something out of the ordinary for the average family sedan. The biggest difference between this all-wheel drive system and the systems we find in Nissan's crossover lineup is that we cannot command a full lock of the center coupling in the Altima. Instead, we just have to let the computer do what it wants to do. Ground clearance in the Altima all-wheel drive is 5.4 inches. That is significantly below something like the Nissan Rogue, obviously below something like the Subaru Forester as well. But as I've said many times, having a confident, secure feel in the winter for a lot of folks that live in the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast has more to do with the way the all-wheel drive system is designed, the power management of the vehicle overall, and less to do with overall ground clearance. For most folks that live in urban or suburban areas, the roads are going to be plowed. You're not going to need really much more than 5 inches of overall ground clearance. Now, obviously, if you live out in the middle of nowhere like I do, if it snowed here, for instance, I would definitely need more ground clearance than the Altima could provide. But most folks that buy compact crossovers or mid-size sedans in America don't live in those situations. And for them, the Altima is going to be just fine. Out on the paved road, the Altima doesn't handle with the crispness that we see in the Camry or the Accord or the steering feel that we find in the Mazda 6. But I don't think that it comes across as sloppy or ponderous as some people have suggested. You can definitely whip the Altima around corners much faster than you might suspect. Definitely faster than the average compact crossover. And again, I think that's one definite way of looking at the all-wheel drive version of this. In our cabin noise test, we measured 70 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this cabin. You should know that that is pretty similar to the Honda Accord and the Toyota Camry, but road noise is not quite as well controlled as we find in the new Accord. But overall, I'm still going to give this an A+, because that's an excellent road noise score. Where this really excels is in overall fuel economy. According to the EPA, the all-wheel drive Altima should be getting between 29 and 30 mpg combined. We've been averaging over 32 miles per gallon in this vehicle. That shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because Nissan's all-wheel drive vehicles generally tend to be very efficient, and the Altima is no different. So when it comes to our overall fuel economy score, I'm certainly going to give this particular model an A+. You won't really find better fuel economy in the 2020 Legacy. It's going to have the same sort of rating as this particular model, likely going to be coming in real-world driving situations about the same kind of 32 miles per gallon. And both of those options are going to be notably above the all-wheel drive versions of the Ford Fusion. Overall, this is exactly what you'd expect out of an all-wheel drive version of the Altima. Handling is definitely acceptable, but a little bit below the leaders in this particular segment. We have a comfortable ride, a quiet cabin, and excellent fuel efficiency, all combined with the availability of all-wheel drive, which makes this much more unique than the average entry in the segment. We don't find all-wheel drive in the Camry, the Accord, the Mazda 3, etc. So depending on how you want to look at it, there really is no alternative to the Altima from the mainline brands in this segment. For 2020, Nissan has fine-tuned the Altima's pricing and the options lineup, again giving us some of those active safety features optional in the base S trim that we didn't have available for 2019. It starts at $24,100. That will get you the base 2.5-liter engine, the CVT, steel wheels, and halogen lamps. But we also get some additional features that I didn't expect, like the active grille shutters, auto high beams, XM radio, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and keyless go. Some of those features you won't find in base models of the competition. Most folks out there are likely going to end up in the SR or SV trims, which are going to be around $26,000 to $28,000, depending on how you have them equipped. A nice touch for 2019 and 2020 is that the Altima is available in all trims with all-wheel drive. Now again, just that 2.5-liter engine, not the 2-liter turbo. But the all-wheel drive option is going to cost you a little bit more than something like the Subaru Legacy at $25,450 starting. On the flip side, that is going to be less than something like a Nissan Rogue S at $26,370. Depending on how you have your Altima equipped, it's going to be $1,000 to $1,500 less expensive than a comparably equipped Nissan Rogue. So if you're torn between a mid-sized sedan and a compact crossover, admittedly the Rogue is one of the larger compact crossovers, definitely keep that pricing difference in mind. The Altima is likely going to be less expensive. It's also going to be more fuel efficient and less expensive likely to keep around, but it's not going to have the cargo capacity that we see in the Rogue. It also is not going to have as much rear seat headroom. With that out of the way, let's dive right into the Toyota Camry. The Camry starts at $24,095 for the base L trim. We do get more power out of that model, 203 horsepower versus the about 190 horsepower or so that we see in the Altima, and we get a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. So if you're looking for an automatic transmission rather than a CVT, then the Camry may be a good option. Toyota's also been pretty aggressive at putting all of their latest active safety features into all of their trims. So in the base Camry, we do get radar adaptive cruise control and all the other features that the Toyota Safety Sense package comes with. In addition, we have Apple CarPlay standard, but not Android Auto at this moment, although it's likely going to happen very, very soon on the Camry. With this generation of the Camry, Toyota has really turned over a new leaf and they've really focused on overall driving dynamics. Unfortunately, they have given up a little bit of rear seat practicality and a hair of comfort in the process. So I think in terms of overall interior comfort, the Altima compares very well to the Toyota Camry, and in terms of rear seat room, they're not far off either. Likely the biggest difference between the Toyota and the Nissan is going to be actual transaction price, so the deal that you're going to be able to work at the dealer lot. Generally speaking, Nissan is a little bit more aggressive at rebates and discounts and that sort of thing than Toyota is, so even though the MSRP is pretty close, the Altima is probably going to end up costing you less. I think the biggest sales benefit for the Camry, however, is its available hybrid system. You'll get up to 50 miles per gallon on average in that. The biggest sales proposition for the Altima is the availability of all-wheel drive, which we simply don't find on the Camry at any price. Likewise, the availability of all-wheel drive is a major differentiator between the Accord and the Altima. The Accord starts at $23,720, but we do get that 1.5-liter turbocharged engine standard, and we get a little bit more power out of it than we find in the Altima. If you're looking to avoid a continuously variable transmission, don't look at the Accord because that 1.5 turbo does include a CVT as well. Although I do like the way that CVT shifts a little bit more than the one in the Nissan Altima. Overall, the two vehicles end up priced very comparably. The Accord gives us a few features that we don't find in the base Altima and then takes a few away. For instance, the Accord is going to give you LED headlamp standard and 2-zone automatic climate control, but it's going to give you a smaller infotainment system and no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto support until you work your way up to the Sport trim. If you don't need all-wheel drive, the Accord is going to give you better handling and better acceleration, and I think overall a slightly more premium feel to the way the cabin is built on the inside. And then there's the availability of the 2-liter turbo and the 10-speed automatic in the Accord. That definitely is my pick if you want a little bit more power. The 2-liter variable compression turbo that we find in the Altima is really an intriguing engine, but it's not going to give you the same kind of performance that we see out of the Accord with its 2.0T and the 10-speed. The 2.0 and 10-speed are likely also going to cost you a little bit less in terms of long-term maintenance. Next up, we have the Ford Fusion. The Fusion is a little bit long in the tooth, and it does date back to 2013, even though it's had 2 facelifts in the interim. But even so, the Fusion continues to sell relatively well in America, likely because it's available with all-wheel drive, and Ford has been pretty aggressive in pricing those vehicles on the dealer lot. The big thing to know about the Fusion is that it is likely going to be terminated sometime in 2020 or possibly 2021, so we don't expect any changes to that model over the next year. But that said, I still think that the Fusion is very attractive. I've always liked the overall exterior and interior design of the Fusion. It's just not feeling terribly fresh at this point in time. You should also know that the all-wheel drive versions of the Fusion are relatively expensive compared to the absolute base trim of the Altima all-wheel drive or something like the Subaru Outback. So Ford is definitely positioning the all-wheel drive option as more of a premium option for the Fusion. Speaking of the Subaru, now we should talk about the new 2020 Legacy. At this point in time, I haven't driven the Legacy yet, but I have driven the Outback. And remember that the Outback and the Legacy are essentially the same vehicle. The major difference is that the Outback is the wagon format, the Legacy is the sedan format, and the Legacy is a little bit closer to the ground. So in terms of overall driving nature, they're really not far off, but the Outback has a little bit more lean, a little bit more roll. Handling is a little bit compromised by the extra weight of the wagon part in the back and the ground clearance as well. We don't know too many details about exact trim levels just yet on the Legacy, but we do know that it's going to start at $22,745, and that is a lot less than the Altima. We also know that although the base model of the Legacy won't have things like keyless go, it is going to have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is a nice touch. It's going to have a 2-screen infotainment center, and every other trim other than the base model is going to have their new, absolutely enormous, nearly 12-inch infotainment screen, which is really cool. We also know that it's going to top out at around $35,000, and it's going to have that 2.4-liter turbo borrowed from the Subaru Ascent. That's going to make it pretty darn quick. Although again, I haven't driven the Legacy yet, on paper it is highly competitive, so this is definitely an option that you should be keeping your eye on. if you're looking to shop sometime in late 2019. We don't know exactly when it's going to go on sale, but you should expect it to probably be sometime around October. As I said earlier in the video, the sedan segment definitely is pushing forward on design, and that's really what we see in the new 2020 Sonata. It's going to have new engines that we haven't seen before, a new 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engine, and a new 1.6-liter turbo. The turbo, however, is not going to be the same kind of performance turbo that we find in the Nissan or in the Subaru Legacy, because it will only be making 180 horsepower. Both those engines are going to get a new 8-speed automatic transmission, no DCTs there under the hood of the Sonata. All versions are going to get wider tires, which is an interesting tweak, and it's longer, sleeker, and lower than before. So it's definitely focusing on someone that wants that style-forward mission and possibly more performance, because we expect to see a Sonata N coming up later. We don't know how much power that's going to have, but some folks are estimating somewhere north of 300 horsepower. I think my bottom line in this segment is that my top favorites are still the Accord and the Camry, but there is definitely a place in your driveway for the Nissan Altima, especially if you're looking for all-wheel drive or you get some of those really great deals going on at the Nissan lot. But I think, honestly, if you're looking for all-wheel drive, the Subaru Legacy is going to be a really strong contender here. I was really surprised how much I liked the interior of the new 2020 Outback and how really sorted that vehicle is out on the road. Again, I am talking about the Outback because it's the one I've been driving. However, the Legacy should be very, very similar. So if you're shopping in this segment, definitely take a good long look at the Accord and take a good long look at that new Subaru Legacy for 2020. It's a really good buy. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. What would you shop for if you were shopping in this segment right now? Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. And if you want to support this channel, either click that join button down there or click up there to the top of your screen and you'll be taken over to patreon.com. I'll see you later.